Hey everybody, this is Mr. Perry and welcome to my video on how to write a rhetorical analysis. Before we get started, I'd like to just give a quick shout out to the folks who gave me a lot of love on YouTube with the first video that I did in this series. This is an updated version of it. You may know that the College Board recently made some changes to the AP language test. They have some new terminology, some new acronyms that they're working with. So even though the first video was very successful and helped a lot of people understand how to write a rhetorical analysis, you are now looking at the updated version of it where we're going to use the acronym SPACECAT. But I'm still going to be using that newsroom clip as the basis for my own rhetorical analysis. So let's go ahead and get started. How to write a rhetorical analysis with Mr. Perry. Well, first, let's start talking about our steps. Step one, obviously, is you need to understand the task. And in order to understand the task of a rhetorical analysis, just take a minute and think about each of the two words that make up the actual word itself, the term itself. So rhetorical obviously refers to rhetoric. Rhetoric, we know, is the art of using language to persuade or influence an audience. So when you have a speaker who wants to persuade people to either do something or believe something or follow an idea, or if there's a call to action, whatever it happens to be, that speaker is going to carefully craft the message using specific language choices in order to maximize the potential for that language to be persuasive, right? That's rhetoric, or looking at all of the language choices a person makes in order to persuade or influence an audience. Then there's analysis, which means to take something that is complex and to break it up into smaller parts for study. It's very difficult to look at something that is elaborate and complex and automatically make sense of it. Very often what we need to do is we need to break it up into smaller parts and study each individual part, and then we can kind of put it back together and look at the larger picture, and it makes a lot more sense. So rhetorical analysis is the process of doing this actual thing. When we write a rhetorical analysis, we are writing an essay that identifies and breaks down the persuasive strategies used by a speaker in a text. Now you might be asking yourself, why do I need to know how to write one of these essays? Well, there's a number of reasons. The practical reason is it's important for passing the AP exam. The AP Language and Composition exam, the second question you're going to get is a rhetorical analysis. Incidentally, it's also the type of essay that you have to write on the SAT test when you take the SAT with the essay. So, like I say, important for a couple of different reasons. Now, the good news is it is potentially the easiest one to write. When you're taking the AP exam, you have to write everything under timed conditions. The nice thing about a rhetorical analysis is it's very formulaic. So as long as you read the text okay and understand the text, then, like I say, potentially it's going to be the easiest one to write. It's not a guarantee, but like I say, some people do find it to be the easiest of the three. More importantly, a rhetorical analysis essay helps us to understand how other people use language to manipulate our own thinking and behavior. The more informed we are on the tricks of the language that other people use in order to manipulate us, the better equipped we are as adults in terms of making our own decisions and being able to recognize when somebody's trying to perhaps mislead us or make us think something that, or do something that we wouldn't normally do. If we understand how rhetoric works, we can call people out on, their manipulative strategies. So that is powerful, very, very powerful. On top of that, rhetorical analysis essays basically help give us more tools in our writer's toolkits in order to be persuasive and powerful with our own writing and speaking. So, again, as we're analyzing the way other people use rhetoric, we can figure out, well, which of these strategies might work for me, and you can always add new tools to your own writer's toolkit. So that in and of itself, like I say, very, very powerful. All right, so step one is understanding the task. Now let's get to step two, potentially the most important step. You've got to engage with your text, all right? You've got to read that bad boy and you've got to annotate the heck out of it. Now, what I recommend is doing what I call an initial read. So you read the text, or if it's a speech, you might listen to the audio, or if it's a video, then, you know, obviously you've got to watch the video. But the first thing you got to do is engage with the text, and you're going to want to take some generalized notes. You want to take some notes on the appeals to ethos, pathos, and logos, because you know that ultimately we have to break this down in terms of rhetoric. And these three concepts, you know, how the speaker establishes credibility and establishes trust with the audience is very important. We also know that how the speaker decides to manipulate the audience's emotions is also very important. And what kind of logical reasoning the speaker brings to the table to build that argument, also super, super important. So first thing you want to look at is this is the A and CAT on Space Cat. This is the A. We're looking for those appeals, and they're typically pretty easy to pick up on. The other thing to do on that first read is just to track the main ideas of the text. Maybe in the margin at the end of each paragraph, you might just do a quick summary note of, okay, this was the main idea of that paragraph. This was the main idea of that paragraph. Then you want to read it again. All right, I always recommend, especially if you have the time, read it a second time and annotate it more. When you read it the second time, here's where you want to be much more specific and discerning on the language choices themselves. You really need to zero in on at the word level or the sentence level. You know, whereas before, when we're doing this initial read, we're really just kind of looking at it on, you know, the main ideas and the paragraph level. On the second read, you want to zero in much more specifically on the words and the phrases and the sentences. And here's where we're going to try to identify the rhetorical strategies. So what patterns in the language do you see starting to, you know, come to light when you read it again? What are some patterns? What are some repeated strategies? Maybe some repeated ideas, some repeated words, repeated sentence structures. You might notice maybe some juxtaposition of ideas. You might notice that the speaker often brings up opposing ideas, maybe presents a series of paradoxes to the audience. But you're looking for, again, patterns in the language and patterns in the ideas. So it could be rhetorical strategies that are included in our rhetorical terms glossary. Word patterns, like I say, very, very common. You might look at what details are presented by the speaker, especially facts or statistics. You certainly want to look for emotionally charged language, so emotional diction that has a very heavy connotation to it is worth pointing out. The speaker might present poetic language. The speaker might present powerful imagery, or even just memorable phrases. All right, but you're looking again at what are the choices that the speaker is making and crafting this message that really make it stand out and really make it unique. Here's where you want to circle, underline, highlight, and definitely label. This is potentially the most important part of all of this, is to label those strategies with whatever it is that you're noticing. If you circle something, label it. Why did you circle it? If you underline it or highlight it, label it. What does it, you know, remind you of? What are you noticing? Super, super important. If all you do is circle, underline, and highlight, and you don't label, it's very difficult to go back through the text and to try to look for what are the repeated strategies, what are the repeated ideas. Whereas, like I say, thoughtful labeling can help you pick up on those patterns a lot more easily. Now, time for step 3. It's time to start writing your essay. And I mentioned this is a very formulaic essay. As soon as you've got your ideas, you can start basically plugging in everything in paragraph form. So the introduction paragraph is where you plug in the space information from SpaceCat. So you're looking at who is the speaker, what's the purpose of the text, who's the intended audience, what is the context surrounding the piece, what is the exigence that promoted the speaker to sit and write these words. And we're going to reference some of the choices and appeals, but we're also going to make sure that we identify the tone. Okay, so plug in the space information, identify the tone word. Now you also might identify multiple tone words, especially if there's a shift in the tone. Then you probably want to label both of them. And, you know, again, just be thoughtful and careful in your language choices here. And then you also want to lay out the most important strategies that really sort of are central to the argument. Be careful here. Do not use the terms ethos, pathos, and logos. You don't want to say the speaker uses ethos, pathos, and logos in order to build his argument that blah, 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 blah. All rhetoric, by definition, includes ethos, pathos, and logos. So, the fact that it is rhetoric at all implies these concepts. So you don't want to use these terms, right? You want to just basically stick to the specific strategies. So before we get into the sample essay, I'm going to take you to my notes on the newsroom speech. So in class, we watched the newsroom speech by Will McAvoy, the main character, and he is the speaker. The purpose of that speech is, as I identified it, to reflect on the greatness of America's history in order to argue its current state of decline. The audience in this scene is the moderator as well as the attendees. As far as context, so, again, rough time period, where's he at, what's going on. This is a televised panel discussion on American politics during the Obama presidency. Based on the details of the video, that's about all you can take from it. Now, exigence, specifically what takes place that requires this speaker to deliver this speech. Well, he's asked by one of the audience members, what makes America the greatest country on earth? Now, when I dig into the tone, I did notice that there was a shift in the tone. It starts with a very scornful tone to it, and then shifts to nostalgic. And then the choices and the appeals, that's what I would end up annotating on this particular text here. I've got the text of the speech. So, by now I would have taken the time to read this a couple of times. I would have noticed, all of the repetition of the we used to do this, we did this, but now we do this. There's a lot of strategies in here that I could definitely highlight as appeals to logic, appeals to emotion, repeated ideas, repeated sentence styles. There's quite a bit going on here that makes this an effective piece of rhetoric. So once I've gone through this stage, I can start writing my essay. So we'll go back to this, and we will look at the introduction paragraph for this rhetorical analysis. So here we go. I've titled my essay, The Great American Myth. While participating in a panel discussion about modern-day politics, news anchorman Will McAvoy is presented with a difficult question. What makes America the greatest country on earth? So right off the bat, I'm establishing context and exigence. I've identified my speaker. And notice, and this is something that you should always do, before you name your speaker, look at what information you have about that person and provide, before you have the person's name, provide that person's title, all right? Because this is where you're basically giving ethos to the speaker, right? So he's a news anchorman, which makes him a credible speaker in this context, right? So you always want to look at what information do you have about the speaker and what title or what position does that person hold. And you want to establish that in the first sentence, okay? So again, context, speaker, exigence. Now I'm going to continue with the rest of the Space Cat info. Seated to his left, the liberal participant offers a simplistic answer, while on his right, the conservative participant recites his redundant response. McAvoy, on the other hand, sidesteps answering altogether until, at the prodding of the moderator and of his own conscience, he erupts with a vehement and contrarian tirade, arguing that America is not, in fact, the greatest country. While reflecting on the glories of America's past, McAvoy shifts his tone from scornful to nostalgic in order to illustrate the country's current state of decline from its glorious history. Incorporating sarcastic and contrarian language choices, McAvoy employs repetition, enumeratio, and juxtaposition to underscore the irrationality of assuming America's global dominance as a great nation. So there you go. All of that Space Cat info is right up here. Down here, I mentioned, I identified the tone right here. And because there is a tone shift, I mentioned both tone words. And then from there, I get into 3 specific strategies: repetition, enumeratio, and juxtaposition. And again, the purpose of the speech. So it's all here. Your job is, again, to figure out how to blend it all together and to write a paragraph similar to this. All right, so there you go. Step 3 is done. Now it's time for step 4. So step 4 you have to do 3 times, okay? Because you got to do 3 body paragraphs. Now, the body paragraphs are your analysis paragraphs. Here's where you have to identify the strategies and really get into how the strategies work. You've got 3 body paragraphs. You're going to work chronologically. Very important. You're going to say what's the first strategy. So you're going to kind of look at the beginning part of the text, and then you're going to look at what is the next important strategy used, perhaps somewhere in the middle. And then towards the end, you always want to look at how does the speaker end the speech or the text, and identify that final strategy, and then analyze that. Okay. There are 4 steps that have to be completed in a body paragraph or in an analysis paragraph. First thing you need to do is identify the section of the text that you're discussing and the main idea of that section. So maybe 1 or 2 sentences, at least one, where you say, at the beginning of the speech, blah, 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 and then, you know, in the middle of the speech, and then to conclude the speech, the speaker, blah, 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 right? You got to make sure you identify where you're at, right? And what's the main idea. You have to make sure that you identify and provide specific examples for the rhetorical strategies used by the writer. So at the beginning, what's the first rhetorical strategy? And what is a quote that shows how it operates or where it is? And then when you're in the middle of the speech or the middle of the text, again, what's a second rhetorical strategy? And, you know, where is a quote? Where are the words that create that strategy? And then you do it again for the third. Very important. You have to make sure that you explain how that rhetorical strategy helps the writer achieve his or her purpose. So whatever purpose you identify in that introduction paragraph, you have to make sure that you refer back to it in your analysis paragraphs. Oops, sorry. And then finally, to complete these paragraphs, you have to identify the effect, or at least the intended effect, of the rhetorical strategy on the audience, right? So relating it to the purpose of the speech and identifying the impact it's supposed to have on the audience, those are 2 key components of these paragraphs. So let's look at some of the paragraphs that I have here. By now you might have noticed that I have certain words that are highlighted in yellow, and I'm going to discuss at the end of the video why these are highlighted in yellow. So just bear with me for now. So here's the first analysis paragraph from this particular speech. Most importantly, McAvoy opens and closes his speech by repeating a direct refutation of the question's premise. While the other participants are quick to respond with cliché and forgettable responses, McAvoy contradicts the question itself by repeating that America is, quote, not the greatest country. Using simple, direct, contrarian language allows McAvoy's response to stand out among the other participating speakers, emphasizing his position how those who assume that America is the greatest country on earth believe in a fantasy. By repeating the line at the end of his speech, McAvoy forces the audience to recognize their own participation in making false assumptions about American society. So I've got the idea and the strategy identified. I've got my quoted evidence right here. And then I spend at least 1 sentence getting into how that quote supports the purpose of the speech. And then this last sentence gets into the intended impact on the audience. Here's the next paragraph. Next, McAvoy enumerates many unflattering facts and statistics about modern-day America to appeal to the audience's sense of logical reasoning. When addressing the issue of freedom, McAvoy lists Canada has freedom, Japan has freedom, the UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia, Belgium has freedom. Identifying so many other countries with free societies clarifies the fact that freedom alone cannot qualify America as the greatest nation on the planet. Continuing with this strategy, McAvoy's use of enumeratio offers a plethora of statistics demonstrating America's inferior global status, including performance in core academic subjects, among many others. By incorporating a multitude of reasons why America cannot be labeled as, quote, the greatest nation on earth, McAvoy provides sufficient counterexamples to negate the premise of the question. This strategy, coupled with his sarcastic tone, leaves the audience members to reconsider their own perception of America's global dominance. My final analysis paragraph. Finally, McAvoy closes his speech. Now notice again, I'm talking about here I am at the conclusion of the speech, right? So I'm identifying where I'm at. Finally, McAvoy closes his speech by shifting the tone towards nostalgia, by using juxtaposition to glorify America's noble past with the current state of degradation. In the final section of the scene, he contrasts positive aspects of American history with deplorable realities of modern American society. For example, McAvoy admonishes, quote, "We waged war on poverty, not poor people," and, quote, "We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior." These examples not only reflect on traditional American ideals, but also positions them alongside current social and political trends that reflect negatively on the country, while simultaneously highlighting the numerous important achievements of America's past, alongside examples of political squabbling and misguided policies of current society. McAvoy appeals to the audience's sense of nostalgia and tradition in order to emphasize his point that America has fallen significantly in global status. Now, I just want to pause momentarily and get into the challenge here. What to analyze, right? When it comes to what am I supposed to get into in those body paragraphs, let's just kind of reconsider, again, what should we be concentrating on? You want to look for, in a nutshell, you want to look for what's most important, all right? You can't analyze every strategy that a speaker uses, so you really want to look at what are the dominant strategies, the dominant rhetorical ideas that build this particular speech or text and make it stand out among the others, right? So look for patterns and dominant ideas or strategies. Especially look for repeated ideas, repeated words, or repeated sentence styles, all right? I noticed in the Will McAvoy speech that he repeats America is not the greatest country. It's at the very beginning and it's at the very end. So there's repetition. I also noticed that he used several lists, right? I noticed there's a number of long lists of facts and statistics, which made me think of enumeratio. So again, we've got, kind of some sentence styles or some strategies that are being repeated and relied on. The final paragraph is, we used to do this, we used to do this, we used to do this, but now we do this, and now we do this. So I'm seeing that juxtaposition being used over and over and over again. And for appeals to logic, appeals to emotion, appeals to ethics, appeals to authority, how are they created? Well, again, that long list of facts and statistics relates to that sense of logic. And, longing for the glory of the past definitely appeals to, the audience's sense of emotion. These are all things that unite the audience. I wish we could return to that, right? You want to look for the language choices that have a really heavy emotional aspect to them. Diction and connotation are always a go-to when you're doing a rhetorical analysis. So there's never one specific thing that you're looking for because every speech is different, every text is different, but you're looking for what's most important, what really defines the argument that I'm reading or that I'm listening to. All right, step 5. It's time to wrap it up. Here's the good news. For a conclusion paragraph on a rhetorical analysis, the College Board really only wants maybe 2, maybe 3 sentences where you simply remind your reader of the strategies that support the purpose of the text and the impact it's supposed to have on the audience the most, okay? So here's my quick and concise conclusion. In summary, Will McAvoy effectively blends many rhetorical strategies, including repetition, enumeratio, and juxtaposition, to contradict the assumption that America is the greatest nation on earth. He leaves his audience with a sense of shame and that hopefully may become a call to action to rediscover the passion, nobility, and dignity of traditional American politics and society. So there you go. Those are your 5 steps. Now let's talk about some common mistakes. Some people, when they read a rhetorical analysis, go off topic and they write about their own point of view. Your point of view does not matter in a rhetorical analysis. If you are reading a piece about climate change, for instance, and if you feel really, really strongly about something related to climate change, you really should not bring that to the table in a rhetorical analysis because, again, the only thing you're supposed to do is to analyze somebody else's text, somebody else's argument here. So be cautious not to bring your own opinions to the table. You're just supposed to analyze how somebody else builds his or her argument. Always, always, always go beyond ethos, pathos, and logos. In fact, don't even use these words in a rhetorical analysis essay. The College Board readers who score these exams, they don't want to see it. They don't want to see the words ethos, pathos, logos. They want you to be more specific, right? So if you see a heavily emotional text, don't use the word pathos. Again, just identify what specific emotion is being drawn upon. And the same thing with logos. If there's logic to the piece, again, how is it created? Is it through facts and statistics? Is it through if-then statements? Is it through creating cause and effect relationships between ideas? And then also be sure in the analysis paragraphs, relate your quoted evidence of strategies to the purpose and the audience, all right? Without connecting it to the purpose of the text and without getting into the intended impact on the audience, it's not really a rhetorical analysis. The analysis is very incomplete without these two steps down here. So like I say, super important. And then finally, check yourself, all right? Remember that we are trying to rise above high school level writing. So another set of words maybe to add to our banned words list would be using the word says or states. You don't want to say Will McAvoy says or Will McAvoy states. You want to use what are called rhetorically accurate verbs. And on the notes sheet that I provided in class, if you flip it over, there's a huge list of words that you could use, strong verbs. So instead of using says or states or writes, you can get into all kinds of much more specific and much more effective word choices in terms of describing what's going on, right? And in fact, when you write your rhetorical analysis essays for my class, I'm always going to ask you to highlight your strong verbs. I want you to be very intentional in what words you are actually using when you're describing or when you're introducing these quotes, all right? And with that, my friends, we have come to the end of the revised version of the How to Write a Rhetorical Analysis essay. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you in class.